The silence in Alara Vance's small apartment was not merely the absence of sound. It was a living, breathing entity, a carefully constructed fortress against a world she had learned to distrust. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the jagged silhouette of the city, casting long, bruised shadows across her worn floorboards, Alara would prepare her solitary meal. Tonight, it was a simple bowl of vegetable soup, its steam rising in a thin, ethereal curl that vanished almost immediately into the cool air. The clink of her spoon against the ceramic bowl was the loudest sound, a sharp, singular note in the vast quiet. It felt like a deliberate punctuation mark, emphasizing her isolation. From beyond her thin walls, the city offered a symphony of life, the distant, muffled honk of a taxi, the faint, happy chatter of families from the apartments above and below, a child's joyous squeal. These sounds, vibrant and full of connection, only served to highlight Alara's self-imposed solitude. She moved through her apartment like a ghost, her footsteps barely registering, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace she had meticulously built. Her hands, though, were strikingly delicate, almost translucent, often fidgeting with a small, smooth river stone she carried everywhere. It was a cool, smooth comfort, a tangible link to a past that felt increasingly distant, a time before the silence became her constant companion. Alara was in her late 20s, though the careful austerity of her appearance made her seem older, more resigned. She wore simple, unadorned clothing, muted grays, dull blues, and her rich, dark hair was almost always pulled back in a severe, tight bun, masking the soft curve of her jawline and the striking intensity of her eyes. She cultivated an air of invisibility, a quiet grace that allowed her to slip through crowds unnoticed, a shadow in a bustling world. But beneath the carefully constructed facade of anonymity lay an extraordinary, almost otherworldly, vocal talent, a gift she had consciously, painfully suppressed for years. It was a wellspring of power and beauty she dared not tap, a source of profound joy now buried under layers of trauma and fear. Her days followed a meticulous, unchanging rhythm. She worked as a data entry clerk, a job that demanded precision but offered no opportunity for personal expression or interaction. She valued its quiet, predictable nature, the way it allowed her to remain unseen, unheard. Lunch breaks were spent alone, a book her only companion. Evenings were for quiet reflection, the river stone always clutched in her hand, its cool smoothness a constant reminder of the warmth she once knew. One blustery Tuesday, as Alara walked home from work, the wind whipping at her modest coat, she descended into the subway station, a familiar cavern of rushing air and echoing footsteps. The usual cacophony of the station was punctuated by a momentary struggle near the stairs. A street musician, a young man with earnest eyes and a weathered guitar case, was attempting to navigate the steep, slick steps. His instrument, clearly heavy, seemed to overwhelm his slight frame, and he stumbled, the case almost slipping from his grasp. People hurried past, their eyes averted, absorbed in their own worlds. Alara paused, her internal debate brief but fierce. Her ingrained instinct was to avoid any situation that might draw attention, to remain a silent observer. But the sight of the struggling musician, his face etched with a mix of frustration and resignation, stirred something within her. It was a flicker of the innate compassion that lay buried beneath her layers of self-protection. Without a word, without a moment's hesitation that anyone else could perceive, she stepped forward. Her movements were swift and fluid, a surprising burst of quiet energy. She reached out, her delicate hand finding purchase on the corner of his heavy case, offering a steadying grip just as he lost his balance. The musician, startled, looked up, his eyes wide. Alara's grip was firm, her touch surprisingly strong. She didn't speak, simply adjusted her hold, and with a silent nod, began to help him carry the awkward case down the remaining steps. It was clearly heavy for her slight frame, her muscles straining imperceptibly, but she didn't falter. She was focused, her gaze fixed on the bottom of the stairs, her presence a silent, unwavering support. Once they reached the landing, she gently released her hold on the case. The musician, flustered and grateful, began to stammer his thanks, his hand reaching out as if to stop her. But Ilara, with a fleeting, almost imperceptible dip of her head, was already melting back into the surging crowd. She was gone before he could properly articulate his gratitude, leaving him bewildered but profoundly appreciative. It was a small act, unnoticed by the rushing throngs. But it was a moment where Ilara, despite her fears, chose to connect, to alleviate another's burden without seeking any recognition. It was her own quiet way of saving the cat. As she continued her walk home, the encounter replayed in her mind, a fleeting warmth settling in her chest. She found herself subconsciously humming a perfect note, a resonance so pure it seemed to vibrate within her very bones. It was a sound that belonged to another lifetime, a talent she had rigorously suppressed, a voice she had locked away. The hum escaped her lips almost involuntarily, a ghost of a forgotten melody. But as quickly as it came, it was stifled. Ilara's hand instinctively rising to cover her mouth, her eyes darting around as if afraid the very air had heard her. The fleeting moment of melodic freedom was immediately replaced by the familiar vice of fear, reminding her of the dangers of being heard. Sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night, when the city's hum finally faded into a low drone, a recurring nightmare would claw its way to the forefront of her mind. It was always the same: a vast, crowded stage, dazzling lights, and the exhilarating rush of performance. Then, a sudden, deafening silence, an expectant hush that stretched on, punctuated only by the echo of her own heartbeat. In the dream, she would open her mouth to sing, to fill that terrifying void, but no sound would emerge, only silence, a thick, suffocating, accusatory silence. She would wake up gasping, her throat tight, the phantom silence still ringing in her ears, a stark reminder of the reason she had chosen her mute existence. The memory of the hum, the almost song, now felt like a dangerous flirtation with the very fear that defined her. It was a secret, a scar, and a talent she dared not acknowledge, a force that both terrified and beckoned her. The fragile peace Ilara had meticulously constructed around herself shattered on a Tuesday afternoon, not with a sudden explosion, but with the quiet, devastating ring of her landline phone. It was a relic, rarely used, and its shrill insistence sent a jolt of unease through her. Her landlord, Mr. Abernathy, always communicated via a polite note slipped under her door or a gentle tap on her apartment's frame. This call felt ominous. Hesitantly, Ilara picked up the receiver. "Hello." Her voice was a soft murmur, almost lost in the room. "Ilara, is that you?" "Dear." The voice on the other end was Mr. Abernathy's, but it was thin, reedy, stripped of its usual warmth. He sounded profoundly distressed, a stark contrast to his usual jovial nature. "Mr. Abernathy. What's wrong?" A knot of apprehension tightened in Ilara's stomach. Mr. Abernathy was a man etched from kindness and routine. He was an elderly gentleman in his late 70s, with a shock of unruly white hair and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He had inherited the pre-war apartment building decades ago and managed it with a personal touch, often leaving small gifts of homemade cookies for his tenants. For Ilara, he had been more than just a landlord. He was the closest thing she had to family, a quiet, unwavering presence of warmth in her otherwise solitary life. They're accusing me, Ilara, of fraud. Financial fraud," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. "They say I manipulated funds, diverted investments. It's preposterous. I wouldn't know the first thing about such complicated dealings." His voice broke, a sound of utter bewilderment and pain. Alara's mind reeled. Mr. Abernathy. A fraudster. It was an absurd accusation. The man barely understood how to operate his own smartphone, preferring to jot down notes in a worn, leather-bound ledger. He was a simple, honest soul, spending his days tending to his small rooftop garden and listening to classical music on an antique record player. Who, Mr. Abernathy, who is accusing you? Alara's voice was steadier now, a nascent anger beginning to stir within her. Silas Blackwood and his company. Nexus Innovations. Mr. Abernathy choked out, the names heavy with dread. They say I signed papers, authorized transfers, but I never did. I trusted them. Alara, I just wanted to help my sister's charity secure a better future. Silas Blackwood. The name sent a shiver down Alara's spine. Blackwood was a corporate magnate, a ruthless titan of industry whose name was synonymous with aggressive takeovers and morally ambiguous business practices. He was known for acquiring old, valuable properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods, clearing them out, and erecting glittering, soulless high-rises. Mr. Abernathy's building, quaint and old-fashioned, sat on a prime piece of real estate that Blackwood had publicly expressed interest in for months. The pieces of a sinister puzzle began to click into place. The accusation, Alara quickly realized, was a carefully orchestrated framing. Blackwood wasn't interested in justice. He was interested in property. Mr. Abernathy was simply a convenient obstacle, a gentle man who could be easily crushed. The thought twisted Alara's stomach. They're coming for me. Alara, the police. They're here now. Mr. Abernathy's voice was fading, tinged with panic. I don't understand any of this. I just don't understand. The line went dead. Alara stood frozen. The receiver still pressed to her ear. The dial tone a shrill siren in the sudden silence of her apartment. Mr. Abernathy, arrested, the kindest man she knew, his life being ripped apart by a malicious lie. A cold dread seeped into her, quickly followed by a searing surge of indignation. Her initial reaction was paralysis, a deeply ingrained instinct to retreat, to remain invisible. The old fears, the trauma that had forced her into silence, surged to the forefront of her mind. She paced her small apartment, a frantic energy building inside her, fighting the overwhelming urge to simply disappear. Her hands trembled, clutching the river stone so tightly her knuckles whitened. She remembered the stifling silence of her past, the way her voice had been used against her, the public scrutiny, the agonizing judgment. Don't get involved. Stay safe. Stay quiet. The mantra, honed over years, echoed in her mind. But then, the image of Mr. Abernathy's bewildered, innocent face flashed before her eyes, his wide, trusting gaze. The unfairness of it all was a physical blow. He was innocent. He was being framed. And he was alone. The dormant fire within her, a flickering ember of justice and fierce loyalty, slowly began to glow. She picked up her laptop, her fingers fumbling over the keyboard, frantically searching for information. Silas Blackwood, Nexus Innovations, Mr. Abernathy fraud. The internet was a labyrinth of news articles and corporate filings. Blackwood's name was everywhere, associated with massive wealth and questionable ethics. She found articles detailing his aggressive acquisition strategies, hints of shady dealings dismissed as corporate gossip, but nothing concrete, nothing that could help Mr. Abernathy directly. She tried legal aid services, calling number after number, only to be met with automated messages or the weary voices of overworked pro bono lawyers who offered little immediate hope. These things take time, they said. Time Mr. Abernathy didn't have. Days blurred into a haze of anxiety and frantic research. Alara barely ate, barely slept. The quiet of her apartment, once a comfort, now felt like a suffocating tomb, amplifying her helplessness. She felt the weight of her own silence, a crushing burden. She had chosen invisibility, and now that choice felt like a prison. One evening, unable to bear the gnawing anxiety, Ilara went to Mr. Abernathy's apartment. The door was ajar, a police seal broken, indicating it had been searched. A faint, cloying scent of stale coffee and disinfectant hung in the air. The place felt empty, desolate, stripped of his warm presence. On his small, cluttered desk, amidst stacks of old sheet music and gardening books, she spotted a small, leather-bound journal, tucked beneath a worn copy of a Beethoven symphony. It was unassuming, its pages filled with Mr. Abernathy's neat, looping handwriting. Ilara picked it up, her heart pounding. It was a personal diary, filled with his daily musings, his joy over a blooming rose, his worries about his ailing sister. But interspersed within these personal entries were notes about his dealings with Nexus Innovations. He had kept meticulous records, trusting Blackwood's representatives implicitly. He had documented conversations, meetings, even the names of the advisors who had presented him with the documents he was now accused of signing. There were subtle inconsistencies in Blackwood's company names used in different transactions, a confusing web of shell corporations that Mr. Abernathy, in his innocence, had simply accepted. And then, she found it. A series of entries detailing his passion for classical music, specifically a rare, obscure vocal piece he had discovered years ago. He described its intricate harmonies, its unique structure, and most importantly, how it contained a particular melodic phrase he called the confession, a beautiful, haunting sequence of notes that, to him, represented pure, unadulterated truth. He'd even sketched out a few bars of the melody, notes dancing on the page. He wrote about how he had mentioned this piece to one of Blackwood's associates, a man who claimed to be a fellow classical music enthusiast. During a casual conversation about trust and honesty, a true man, I told him, reveals himself through his art, just as this piece reveals its inner truth through its confession phrase. Mr. Abernathy had written, innocent belief radiating from the page. A chill ran down Ilara's spine. This was it. Not a smoking gun in the traditional sense, but a whisper, a resonance, a detail so specific, so esoteric, that only a select few would recognize it. It hinted at a deeper level of manipulation, a cunning Blackwood's team had employed, preying on Mr. Abernathy's simple trust and love of music. The journal, combined with the crushing realization that Mr. Abernathy was truly, unequivocally innocent and being systematically destroyed, pushed Ilara past her breaking point. The fear that had held her captive for so long began to crack. She looked at the musical notes, the confession phrase, recognizing its complex beauty. Her own suppressed talent, the voice she had so fiercely guarded, began to stir, a latent power awakening. She remembered the silence, the deafening silence of her nightmares. But this time, it was different. This silence was not her own self-imposed prison. It was the deafening silence of injustice, the silence of Mr. Abernathy's unheard truth. She saw his kind, bewildered face again, the helplessness in his eyes. A deep, shaky breath escaped her lips. She could no longer remain a ghost. She had to act, even if it meant confronting her deepest fears, even if it meant stepping back into the harsh glare of public scrutiny. She had to find a way to clear his name. The decision, born of desperation and a fierce, protective love for the man who had been so kind to her, settled in her heart with a quiet, unyielding resolve. The point of no return had been crossed. The air in the courtroom was a palpable entity, thick with anticipation and the hushed murmurs of the gathered crowd. It was the first preliminary hearing for Mr. Abernathy, and the room was stark, imposing, designed to intimidate. Rows of dark wooden benches faced a raised dais where Judge Harrison presided, his stern countenance a formidable barrier. The media, a restless hive of cameras and notebooks, occupied the back rows, eager for any hint of drama. Alara sat in the last row, a small, dark figure trying to blend into the shadows. She felt the weight of every gaze, even those not directed at her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Despite the layers of clothing she wore, a chill seeped into her bones. She clutched the riverstone in her pocket, its smooth coolness a small comfort against the rising tide of her anxiety. The prosecution began its case, a polished, articulate lawyer from Blackwood's formidable legal team painting Mr. Abernathy as a cunning fraudster. He spoke of manipulated funds, diverted investments, a complex web of deceit. He presented documents, charts, and figures, each one a nail in Mr. Abernathy's coffin. Mr. Abernathy himself sat slumped at the defense table, looking frail and utterly bewildered. When it was his turn to speak, his voice was a mere whisper, his explanations disjointed, overwhelmed by the formal language and the crushing weight of the accusations. He truly didn't understand the financial jargon, his innocence making him sound confused, almost guilty. Judge Harrison, a man of sharp intellect and little patience for what he perceived as evasiveness, watched Mr. Abernathy with a growing frown. He was a stickler for order and clarity, and Mr. Abernathy's floundering defense seemed to irritate him. He'd seen countless defendants, and to him, Mr. Abernathy's meek responses seemed to be a sign of either profound incompetence or, worse, calculated silence. Silas Blackwood himself was present, a figure of imposing arrogance in the front row, a slight smirk playing on his lips. His lawyer, a woman with an acid-tongued delivery and an impeccably tailored suit, delivered a particularly damning summary, dissecting Mr. Abernathy's character and financial dealings with cold, clinical precision. "Your Honor," she concluded, her voice dripping with disdain. The defendant's silence, his inability to offer a coherent defense, speaks volumes. It is the silence of a man caught in his own web of deceit. The tension in the room was palpable, a suffocating blanket. Alara felt a deep, wrenching pain in her chest as she watched Mr. Abernathy shrink further into himself, his eyes wide with a desperate, unspoken plea for understanding. The injustice of it was unbearable. His innocence was so clear to her, yet so utterly obscured by the prosecution's carefully constructed lies. In that moment, a desperate empathy for Mr. Abernathy surged through Alara. It was an overwhelming wave, sweeping away her carefully constructed walls of fear and self-preservation. It was not a conscious decision, not an act of defiance, but an involuntary surge of her suppressed talent, a release of the immense emotion swelling within her. From her lips, almost imperceptibly, a small, almost inaudible hum escaped. It was a perfect, resonating note, so pure it seemed to momentarily ripple through the very air of the courtroom. It was not loud, not intrusive, but it carried an astonishing clarity, a pristine quality that cut through the low drone of background noise, the scribbling of pens, the rustle of papers, the hushed coughs. It was a sound of profound sorrow, of empathy so deep it felt like a physical presence, a lament for a truth unheard. Only two people in the crowded courtroom truly registered it. Judge Harrison, a man who prided himself on his unwavering composure, felt a subtle tremor in his sternum, a resonance he hadn't experienced since his younger days as a devoted amateur musician, a choir conductor in his spare time. He paused mid-thought, his brow furrowing slightly. He glanced around, his gaze briefly, almost dismissively, landing on Alara, who, mortified by the involuntary sound, immediately shrunk further into her seat, her face burning. The judge dismissed it as a trick of his mind, perhaps a lingering resonance from a faulty ventilation system or his own fatigue. He quickly regained his composure, but a faint, almost imperceptible seed of intrigue had been planted. Sitting a few rows ahead of Alara, a young woman with a sharp, intelligent face and keen, observant eyes paused her furious note-taking. This was Lena Davies, a budding investigative journalist, new to the city and hungry for a story that transcended the mundane. She had heard it, a sound so exquisitely pure, so profoundly resonant, that it seemed to hang in the air for a fraction of a second before dissipating. It was unlike anything she had ever heard, a sound that stirred a deep, almost primal curiosity within her. Her gaze, more searching than the judge's, landed squarely on Alara, who was now a study in self-effacing stillness. Lena's journalistic instinct, honed by years of digging for hidden truths, told her that there was something profoundly unusual, something worth investigating, about the quiet woman in the back row. Silas Blackwood, however, noticed nothing. He was too consumed by his impending victory, too focused on the humiliation of Mr. Abernathy and the expansion of his empire, to perceive anything beyond the immediate proceedings. His self-satisfied smirk remained fixed. Judge Harrison, though momentarily unsettled by the unexpected resonance, quickly dismissed it from his conscious thought. His focus returned to the proceedings, and his initial internal irritation with the perceived silence of the defense, Mr. Abernathy's inability to speak clearly and forcefully in his own behalf, intensified. He leaned forward, his voice cutting through the courtroom. "Mr. Abernathy," he stated, his tone firm, "your silence, and the lack of a compelling defense, is not helping your case. While silence may speak volumes, it rarely, in my experience, speaks in favor of the accused." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, a clear admonition. "Unless you or your appointed counsel can offer something more substantial, I am inclined to view this as a clear admission of guilt." This public rebuke, delivered with the judge's characteristic gravitas, was a clear signal. It emboldened Blackwood's legal team, who exchanged confident glances. The prosecuting attorney, sensing the momentum, pushed for a swift and severe sentencing, arguing that the irrefutable evidence and the defendant's lack of defense made the case clear. The words were a hammer blow to Alara's heart. Mr. Abernathy looked utterly defeated, his head bowed. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that he would not survive prison. He would simply waste away. As the hearing concluded, the courtroom erupted in a flurry of activity. Media descended, microphones thrust towards Blackwood's smug lawyer. Mr. Abernathy was led away by bailiffs, his shoulders slumped. Alara started to slip out, desperate to disappear again, to process the crushing weight of what had just happened. But a hand gently touched her arm. "Excuse me," a voice said, low and inquisitive. Alara turned, her eyes meeting Lena Davis's. The journalist's gaze was intelligent, curious, but not intrusive. "I couldn't help but notice. A sound," Lena began, her voice hesitant, as if testing the waters. "A hum, almost. It was extraordinary. Did you hear it?" Alara's breath hitched. She fought the urge to deny it, to bolt. But something in Lena's eyes, a genuine interest, a lack of judgment, stopped her. This wasn't the ravenous curiosity of the media. It was something else, something softer, more discerning. I heard nothing," Alara managed, her voice barely a whisper, a desperate attempt to cling to her anonymity. Lena, however, was not easily deterred. She observed Alara's rapid blink, the subtle clench of her jaw. It was a unique sound. Lena pressed, her voice unwavering. "And you seem deeply affected by this case." She gestured towards the emptying courtroom. "Mr. Abernathy, he seems like a good man." And that silence, the judge's words, they felt so unfair. "Don't you think?" Alara looked from Lena's earnest face to the now empty defense table. The injustice was a burning ember in her chest. Lena wasn't asking for a scoop. She was offering a connection, an understanding. For the first time in years, Alara felt a sliver of hope, a crack in her carefully constructed wall. "He is innocent," Alara whispered, the words a profound confession, a tremor running through her. Lena's eyes widened, a flicker of excitement lighting them. "I believe you," she said softly, her voice conspiratorial. "And I think that sound, it has something to do with it. My name is Lena Davies. I'm a journalist. I want to help. Perhaps your voice can unmask his truth." She handed Alara a business card, its crisp edges a stark contrast to Alara's worn riverstone. "If you decide to speak, truly speak, please call me." Alara clutched the card, her heart pounding. The choice was stark: remain silent and let Mr. Abernathy be consumed by Blackwood's lies, or confront her deepest fears, unmask her voice, and fight for the truth. The seed had been planted, the connection made, and with it, the terrifying, exhilarating realization that her unique gift might be the only thing that could save Mr. Abernathy. The days leading up to Mr. Abernathy's final trial were a maelstrom of conflicting emotions for Alara. The business card Lena Davies had pressed into her hand felt like a burning coal, a constant reminder of the terrifying choice before her. Her nights were plagued by the nightmare of the silent stage, now more vivid, more suffocating than ever before. Yet, the image of Mr. Abernathy's broken spirit, the sheer injustice of his situation, fueled a resolve she hadn't known she possessed. She had to act. She had to. Lena Davies, true to her word, became an unexpected ally. She wasn't a lawyer, but her journalistic tenacity was invaluable. She spent hours sifting through public records, corporate filings, and obscure online forums. While she couldn't unearth a definitive smoking gun, she found minor discrepancies in Blackwood's corporate structures, inconsistent dates in some of his financial documents, and a pattern of aggressively acquiring properties from vulnerable, often elderly, owners. These were whispers, not shouts, but they provided context, painting a clearer picture of Blackwood's predatory methods. More importantly, Lena believed Alara. She saw the quiet conviction in Alara's eyes, the deep-seated pain that spoke of a truth far more profound than any legal brief. "We don't have much, Alara," Lena admitted one afternoon, her brow furrowed in frustration as they huddled in a quiet corner of a bustling coffee shop. No direct evidence that Blackwood framed him. His legal team is airtight. The judge, he's known for being no-nonsense, and he's clearly frustrated with Mr. Abernathy's lack of a strong defense. Alara's grip tightened on the riverstone in her pocket. "But he's innocent. Lena. His journal. It hinted at something. A piece of music. A confession in the notes." She pulled out the worn journal, carefully showing Lena the sketched musical notes. "He mentioned talking about it to one of Blackwood's associates. He thought it was a shared appreciation. But what if it was a test? A way to understand Mr. Abernathy's mind, to exploit his trust." Lena studied the notes, her expression thoughtful. "It's thin. Alara, very thin. How do we present this? It's not evidence in the legal sense." "My voice," Alara whispered, the words feeling foreign and heavy on her tongue. I can recreate sounds. Not just sing, but capture the essence, the exact acoustic signature of things. If I can recreate the sounds associated with Blackwood's deception, perhaps even that specific melody, maybe the judge will hear the truth." Lena's eyes widened, a slow dawning of understanding. She remembered the fleeting hum in the courtroom, the almost imperceptible resonance. "You mean, you can mimic the sounds of evidence, the specific whir of a server, the click of a lock. That's impossible." "It's not mimicry," Alara corrected, her voice gaining a surprising firmness. "It's more like resonance, finding the core frequency, the unique signature of a sound, and then giving it voice." She didn't explain the full extent of her ability, the almost psychic connection she had to the essence of sounds, born from years of hyper-focused listening as a coping mechanism. She simply knew it was a gift, and now, for the first time, she felt compelled to use it. Lena, though skeptical of the mechanism, recognized the audacious potential. The judge would never allow it as direct evidence. But now, what if it was part of your testimony as a character witness for Mr. Abernathy? To explain his nature, his innocence, through an unconventional means. It's a long shot, but it's our only shot. And so, the plan was hatched. A desperate, unconventional gamble. Lena, leveraging her nascent journalistic influence, managed to secure a single, final opportunity for Alara to speak during the defense's closing arguments. It would be framed as a character witness testimony for Mr. Abernathy, a desperate last resort to humanize him before the court. There would be no cross-examination of Alara's sounds, only her testimony, her voice, and the judge's ruling. The day of the final trial dawned gray and unforgiving. The courtroom was a palpable entity of tension, packed to capacity. Every seat was filled, the air thick with anticipation and the acrid scent of nervous sweat. The media, a ravenous beast, clawed for vantage points, their cameras poised like hungry vultures. This was a high-profile case, a David and Goliath struggle, and everyone wanted to witness the inevitable downfall of Mr. Abernathy. The atmosphere was designed to overwhelm. The prosecution, confident in their watertight case, presented a barrage of seemingly irrefutable evidence. Blackwood's lawyer, a picture of smug confidence, delivered her closing statement, systematically dismantling Mr. Abernathy's character, painting him as a deceptive, if bumbling, old man. Judge Harrison, a man known for his unwavering impartiality, but also his impatience with anything he perceived as a waste of court time, presided with an air of stern authority. He had seen Alara's consistent presence in the courtroom over the past few weeks. A silent, almost painful attention to the proceedings. He was intrigued, but also increasingly irritated by Mr. Abernathy's continued meekness, interpreting it as either stubbornness or a tacit admission of guilt. He cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the hushed murmurs. "The defense has requested to call one final character witness," Judge Harrison announced, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom, finally resting on Alara. "Ms. Vance, if you please." Alara stood, her legs feeling like lead. The path to the witness stand felt like an infinitely long walk, every eye in the room a laser beam burning into her. She was utterly alone, facing the formidable legal team of Blackwood, the skeptical, impatient gaze of Judge Harrison, and the ravenous, expectant eyes of the media. The grand, imposing architecture of the courtroom seemed to press down on her, magnifying her insignificance. It was the very place where her deepest anxieties about public exposure had always festered. Her hands trembled, her throat tight, a familiar constriction settling in her chest. The traumatic memories of her past resurfaced with crushing intensity. The whispers, the accusations, the way her unique ability had been twisted, used against her, turning a source of joy into a wellspring of fear. She could hear the phantom silence of her nightmare, now amplified by the expectant hush of the courtroom. Her breath hitched. Could she do this? Could she truly expose herself, her deepest secret, to this unforgiving glare? Judge Harrison, impatient with her hesitation, leaned forward. "Ms. Vance," he stated, his voice sharp. "The court is waiting, and I must remind you, we are on a tight schedule. We have already endured significant delays in this case." He glanced at the clock, a stark reminder of the dwindling time. "You have 5 minutes, young lady," he continued, his tone bordering on exasperation, "to provide something more than platitudes or mute appeals. I've heard enough of Mr. Abernathy's eloquent silence. Unless you can offer something substantial, I will be forced to move to sentencing." The judge's words, his disdain for mute appeals, hit Alara like a physical blow. Her past trauma, the very reason for her silence, felt mocked, dismissed. The pressure was immense, a crushing weight on her shoulders. 5 minutes to save Mr. Abernathy, to unravel Blackwood's intricate web of lies, to unmask her own voice, and in doing so, risk everything. Her fingers tightened around the river stone in her pocket, a desperate anchor in the storm of her fear. The silence of the courtroom felt deafening, expectant, waiting for her to break, to fail. The air thrummed with a terrifying tension, but beneath the fear, a tiny, defiant spark began to ignite. She looked towards Mr. Abernathy, who sat with his head bowed, resigned to his fate, his kindness, his unwavering faith in the good in people, his simple love of life. It all coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. He deserved to be heard, and she was the only one who could give him that voice. Alara stood before the court, utterly exposed. The silence of the courtroom, once a terrifying void, now felt like a vast canvas awaiting her touch. The words of Judge Harrison, his scorn for mute appeals, echoed in her ears. But instead of crushing her, they ignited a fierce, defiant spark. She looked at Mr. Abernathy, his head bowed in defeat, and a surge of protective love swept away the last vestiges of her fear. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about his truth. She closed her eyes for a brief, agonizing second, drawing a ragged breath. The world outside the courtroom faded, replaced by an inner landscape of pure sound. She recalled Mr. Abernathy's journal, the intricate, beautiful musical piece he'd described, its confession embedded in its notes. She felt the cool, smooth river stone in her pocket, a small anchor. When she opened her eyes, a transformation had occurred. The trembling in her hands had stilled. Her delicate features, usually guarded, now held an expression of profound concentration, almost of transcendence. The entire courtroom held its breath, sensing the shift. Then, from her lips, a single, clear note emerged. It wasn't sung, not in the traditional sense. It was a sound so exquisitely pure, so profoundly resonant, that it seemed to materialize in the air, hanging suspended before gently dissipating. It was the opening note of that specific, rare musical piece Mr. Abernathy had cherished, a note that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words, a melody of truth. The courtroom remained utterly silent, captivated. Alara didn't sing. She channeled. She began to weave a tapestry of sounds, each one meticulously recreated, each one a direct, undeniable piece of auditory evidence. First, a faint, almost imperceptible click. It was the distinct sound of a specific, antique safe lock that only Mr. Abernathy had used, a sound unique in its delicate mechanics. It spoke of his habits, his trust in a physical, old-world security, a stark contrast to the digital manipulation he was accused of. The sound was so precise, so real, that some jury members instinctively looked towards the empty space where such a safe might stand. Then a low, consistent whir, not just any whir, but the specific outdated server from Blackwood's company that processed Mr. Abernathy's initial legitimate transactions. Alara's voice captured the age of the machinery, its inefficient hum, the precise cadence of its operations. It was the sound of truth, buried beneath layers of digital deceit. This sound subtly hinted at the early, innocent stages of Mr. Abernathy's interaction with Blackwood's company, before the fraudulent activity began. The sounds built, one upon another, like an unseen symphony. A distinct, rarely used bell from a nearby clock tower chimed, marking the exact time of one of Blackwood's fraudulent transactions, a time Mr. Abernathy had always been home, tending to his garden, far from any financial dealings. The bell's unique, slightly off-key resonance was perfectly replicated, undeniable in its specific identity. Then, interwoven with these precise, almost forensic sounds, came the melodic phrase, Mr. Abernathy's journal described as a confession to his innocence. It was a complex arrangement of notes, beautiful and haunting, that only a true connoisseur of that specific piece would recognize as belonging to the rare composition. It was a melody that Mr. Abernathy himself would have known, a private language of truth. Ilara's voice, devoid of lyrics, infused this melody with such profound emotion that it seemed to sing of honesty, of a spirit incapable of deceit. The courtroom was mesmerized. Judge Harrison, initially stunned, slowly rose from his bench, his face a mask of disbelief turning to profound awe. His hand, which had been ready to bang the gavel to silence any perceived theatrics, now hung suspended in the air, forgotten. His ears, trained by years of appreciating subtle musical nuances, picked up on the incredible precision, the perfect pitch, the embedded meaning within each sound. He recognized the rare melody, a piece he himself had once tried to learn, its complex confession phrase challenging even seasoned vocalists. The jury members, previously bored or skeptical, were now leaning forward, tears in some of their eyes, their faces reflecting a dawning realization of truth. They didn't understand how she was doing it, but they felt it. The sounds weren't just sounds. They were stories, each one a piece of the puzzle, laid bare by Ilara's extraordinary gift. Just as Ilara reached the crescendo of her performance, a sound that hinted at Blackwood's true deceit, a specific, almost imperceptible tremor in a fabricated document's voice recording, a nervous tick in the voice of Blackwood's associate that Ilara, through painstaking analysis of existing audio, had managed to reproduce with absolute fidelity. Her voice wavered. The trauma, the exhaustion, the sheer magnitude of what she was doing, threatened to overwhelm her. Her body shook. A wave of doubt washed over the courtroom, a collective gasp. Blackwood's lawyer, who had been watching with growing alarm, now allowed a faint, triumphant smirk to play on her lips, confident in Ilara's collapse. But Ilara, seeing Mr. Abernathy's tear-filled eyes, his silent plea for justice, found a hidden wellspring of strength. She pushed through the tremor, her voice regaining its impossible clarity, delivering the final, resonant sound. It was the exact sound of a specific, unique musical chime that marked the true moment of Blackwood's fraudulent transaction, a chime that only those who worked in the specific office where the fraud was committed would recognize, a subtle, almost secret alarm bell that Blackwood had used to signal the completion of his illicit transfers. This final sound, a confession of Blackwood's undeniable guilt, echoed through the courtroom, a perfect, undeniable resonance of truth. The effect was instantaneous and electrifying. Blackwood's face, initially smug and disdainful, drained of all color, replaced by a look of terror and dawning defeat. He recoiled as if physically struck. The air crackled. A moment of stunned silence. Then the courtroom erupted. Whispers erupted. Then a collective murmur of stunned recognition. The sheer audacity, the impossible precision of Ilara's testimony, had broken through the legal jargon and the prosecution's lies. The media scrambled, phones raised, recording a voice that transcended mere sound, capturing a moment of pure, unadulterated truth. Then, the applause began, scattered at first, then growing, swelling, until it became a roaring torrent of sound that filled the courtroom. People rose to their feet, cheering, weeping. The crowd's faces reflected a profound transformation from skepticism to awe, then to an outpouring of admiration and vindication. Ilara's victory was not just a legal triumph, it was a societal affirmation, a moment when the unheard were finally given a voice, and the truth, unmasked by sound, echoed a confession everyone needed to hear. The thunderous applause that filled the courtroom was a sound Alara had never imagined hearing directed at her. It wasn't just noise, it was an affirmation, a roaring wave of collective vindication that washed over her, sweeping away years of fear and self-imposed silence. She looked at Mr. Abernathy, now standing, tears streaming down his face, a look of profound relief and gratitude transforming his features. Judge Harrison, still standing, slowly brought his hand down, not with a gavel, but with a silent, almost reverent gesture of acknowledgement. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and decisive. Silas Blackwood, still pale with shock and rage, was immediately arrested. His elaborate scheme, meticulously built on fabricated evidence and his victim's trusting nature, unraveled under the weight of Alara's auditory revelations. The specific sounds she had recreated, the unique click of the safe, the whir of the old server, the distinctive clock tower chime, and especially the subtly warped vocal tremor in the fabricated recording, provided undeniable, irrefutable corroboration of Mr. Abernathy's journal entries and Blackwood's deceit. The judge deemed Alara's testimony admissible, not as traditional evidence, but as a compelling demonstration of the environment and true events surrounding the fraud, bolstering the jury's belief in Mr. Abernathy's innocence and Blackwood's guilt. Blackwood's high-powered legal team, caught off guard by the sheer impossibility of Alara's performance, found themselves with no defense. His assets were frozen. His corporate empire began to crumble under the weight of immediate investigations into his other questionable dealings, and he faced a lengthy prison sentence for grand fraud and obstruction of justice. The fall of Silas Blackwood, the ruthless titan, was as swift and dramatic as his rise. Judge Harrison, a man who had once scoffed at what he perceived as Mr. Abernathy's mute appeals, was visibly, profoundly moved. He cleared his throat, his voice now devoid of its earlier impatience. "Mr. Abernathy," he began, his gaze softening, "the court wishes to extend its sincerest apologies for the misunderstanding and the hardship you have endured. Your innocence has been not merely proven, but unmasked in a manner unlike any I have ever witnessed." He then turned his gaze towards Alara, his eyes holding a newfound respect, even wonder. "And to Ms. Vance," he continued, his voice ringing with conviction, "your courage and your extraordinary gift have not only served justice here today, but have reminded us all that truth, in whatever form it chooses to reveal itself, will always find a voice. You, young lady, unmasked a confession everyone needed to hear. It was a public retraction, a humbling admission of his own short-sightedness and prejudice against what he had initially perceived as mere silence. With Mr. Abernathy's exoneration, the gates of opportunity, once firmly shut to Alara, now swung wide open. The public, captivated by her incredible story and the sheer artistry of her truth-telling, flooded her with offers. Prestigious conservatories reached out, offering full scholarships and special programs. Recording contracts from eager music labels poured in, envisioning her as the next vocal sensation. Philanthropic organizations, inspired by her use of talent for justice, sought her unique ability for various causes, from trauma therapy to forensic audio analysis. But Alara, no longer defined by her fear or the confines of her past, had a different vision. She had found her voice, not in performance, but in purpose. She chose to establish a foundation, the Resonance Project, dedicated to using sound and music to expose injustice and heal trauma. It would be a place where the unheard could find their voice, where the subtle truths hidden in everyday sounds could be brought to light. She accepted a position as a guest lecturer at a renowned music academy, not to perform on stage, but to teach the art of listening, of truly hearing, of discerning the emotional and factual nuances embedded within soundscapes. Days after the trial, Alara sat with Lena Davies in a quiet, sun-drenched cafe, the gentle hum of the city a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of Alara's past. "Lena," her journalism career now skyrocketing, beamed across the table. "Ilara," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "Your voice. It didn't just sing. It spoke. It spoke for all those who couldn't be heard, for all the truths that are buried under lies." Ilara smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes, softening the lingering shadows there. She no longer clutched the riverstone. Instead, she felt a quiet strength radiating from within. "It wasn't just my voice, Lena," she replied, her voice steady and clear. "It was Mr. Abernathy's story, the truth that needed to be heard. I just helped it find its way out." She paused, then, for the first time, elaborated on the deeper origins of her gift. "My ability to recreate sounds, to capture their essence, it developed in isolation. After what happened in my past, when my voice was unknowingly used to manipulate a situation, I retreated. I became obsessed with listening, with understanding the true nature of sounds, distinguishing genuine from artificial. It was a coping mechanism, a secret solace. I learned to identify the subtle tremors, the precise frequencies, the hidden confessions within sounds. I used it as a shield, but now I can use it as a tool." She explained how her past trauma, the pain of being unwittingly complicit in a deception, had forged her sensitivity to sound, transforming it from a source of fear into a profound tool for discerning truth. Lena listened, her expression a mix of understanding and awe, recognizing the depth of Ilara's journey. 1 year later, the city's skyline gleamed under a benevolent sun. But for Ilara Vance, the world felt entirely new, vibrant with purpose and a profound sense of peace. The Riverstone, once a constant, comforting presence in her pocket, was gone. In its place, around her neck, hung a delicate silver locket, a gift from Mr. Abernathy, engraved with a single, perfectly rendered musical note. It was a tangible symbol of the harmony she had found, a gentle reminder of the man who had, inadvertently, unlocked her voice. Ilara was no longer the silent shadow. Her foundation, the Resonance Project, had soared beyond her wildest dreams, gaining international recognition. It wasn't merely a charity, it was a movement, a testament to the power of sound to reveal hidden truths and heal unseen wounds. She no longer shied away from public speaking. Her voice, once a source of terror, was now a beacon of hope and clarity, resonating with a quiet authority that commanded attention. She worked tirelessly alongside Lena Davies, who had become not just her media liaison, but a cherished friend. Her journalistic prowess now dedicated to amplifying the stories unearthed by the Resonance Project. Together, they traveled, spreading awareness, helping countless others find justice through unexpected auditory clues, and providing therapeutic support through sound. Ilara had found a deep, abiding sense of purpose. Her once suppressed talent, the very thing that had driven her into isolation, was now a powerful force for good, a testament to the idea that even the most painful experiences could be transmuted into a source of strength and light. She discovered that her extraordinary auditory memory and mimicry skills weren't just for exposing fraud, they were profoundly healing. She used them not to perform, but to help people identify deceptive patterns in audio recordings, assisting law enforcement in complex cases. More profoundly, she used sound in therapy sessions, guiding individuals through their own sonic landscapes to release trauma and find emotional catharsis. Her workshops at the Music Academy, initially met with skepticism, were now in high demand. She didn't teach vocal techniques in the traditional sense, but rather the art of deeply listening to the nuances of human speech, to the ambient sounds of an environment, to the subtle truths embedded within everyday acoustics. She mentored young individuals who, like her, had experienced trauma and were struggling to find their voices, their unique strengths. She taught them that silence could be powerful, but that finding one's voice, in whatever form it manifested, was a journey of courage and self-discovery. Her classrooms were filled with laughter and shared experiences, a testament to her profound impact. She believed that everyone had a voice waiting to be heard, a unique resonance that could cut through the noise of the world. One warm afternoon, Ilara stood on a small, unadorned stage in a bustling community center. It wasn't a grand opera house, not the setting of her old nightmares, but a place filled with the vibrant energy of children and eager community members. She wasn't singing a complex aria or recreating forensic sounds. Instead, she was gently guiding a group of children, their faces alight with innocent joy, as they created a tapestry of sounds. One child giggled, another mimicked the precise chirping of a robin. A third gently brushed a feather against a drum, creating the soft rhythm of falling rain. Each sound, simple and pure, blended harmoniously, creating a unique symphony of peace and hope. Ilara's eyes, once shadowed by fear and the weight of her past, now sparkled with a profound light, reflecting the joy and purpose she had found in unmasking truth and, more importantly, in amplifying the voices of the unheard. She moved among them, a quiet conductor of their collective harmony, her presence a silent, guiding force. The camera, in a symbolic gesture, pulled back, showing the audience, parents, teachers, community elders, their faces radiant with hope, their ears open, truly listening. The sounds filled the space, a testament to the healing power of shared expression, a collective confession of beauty and connection that echoed outward, promising a future of profound resonance. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies, and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.